People ask me why I don't talk about Vreth Station. I tell them there is no Vreth Station. There never was a station. That's the first thing they got wrong about us. They assumed anything intelligent must build fixed structures. The Vreth Confluence doesn't build. It flows. It catalogues. It moves through a system like weather, and when it decides to take stock of a new species, it doesn't knock. It just starts counting. I was a gunnery sergeant, 3rd Marine Reconnaissance, attached to the armed deep survey cutter UES Harrow, 12 crew, 8 Marines. We were mapping the lower atmosphere of a methane-class world in the Seneth Reach, a place so hostile the briefing officer called it professionally uninhabitable, and said it with a straight face. The Harrow was a tough little ship, armored underbelly, redundant drives, rated for atmospheric insertion to 60 kilometers. We had inserted to 42 when the magnetosphere shear hit us. That was the storm, the kind that doesn't appear on any chart because charts require repeat observations, and nothing sensible had gone that deep before. We grounded on a continental shelf 800 meters below the cloud floor. Hard landing, 2 crew with broken bones, the forward sensor array gone, the primary drive cooked. Lieutenant Vasara got on the emergency beacon immediately. Then the hull went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the storm passing. It started with the lights. Not our lights, something outside. Fine spectrum pulses along the hull, barely visible through the port glass. The color of a gas flame turned very low. They moved slowly, methodically, section by section, the way you'd run a diagnostic sweep on something you'd found and weren't sure yet was worth keeping. Vasara said, "Contact." Nobody argued with him. We didn't see them board. There was no breach, no cutting, no lock cycling. One moment, the Harrow's internal sensors showed 12 human heat signatures and nothing else. The next, the readings went strange. Additional signatures, but wrong. Diffuse, spread across surfaces, interpenetrating the ship's own thermal profile the way ink spreads in water. The Vreth Confluence, as we would later name it, had no discrete bodies. It was a distributed intelligence that existed partly in the electromagnetic spectrum, and partly in a biological substrate it carried in microscopic suspension. A living catalog medium is the closest the xenobiologists ever got. It came aboard the way a gas comes into a room, through every seam at once. I know what they did because I was conscious for most of it. They were not hostile. I want to be precise about that, because the word gets used loosely and it matters here. They weren't hostile the way a scalpel isn't hostile. It's the wrong category. They were cataloging. That is the only word. Each of us was assessed. Our respiration rate, our neural activity, our cellular repair mechanisms, our metabolic ceiling, and filed. I felt it as a pressure behind my eyes and a faint warmth along my spine, like the onset of a fever that never quite arrives. Corporal Inez, who was sitting next to me, said it felt like being weighed. Then she went to sleep, not unconscious, asleep, calm. The Vreth had finished with her apparently, and had done something to her nervous system that read, in their catalog, as assessed, low order, cataloging complete. They put her down like a file being closed. One by one, the crew slept. I watched it happen. Vasara last among the officers. He held his eyes open an extra few seconds, looked at me, and then he was gone. The Confluence's attention, and I felt it as a thing with weight and direction, moved entirely onto me. I don't know why I didn't sleep. The xenobiologist spent 2 years trying to answer that and eventually put it down to a combination of factors. My metabolic rate running high from the crash adrenaline, a prior head injury that had left some anomalous white matter scarring, and what one of them diplomatically called an unusual relationship with the pain response, which meant I had trained myself, over 15 years of hard deployments, to function past the point where most human bodies start shutting down, not because I was special, because I had practiced it so many times it had become, for me, a kind of ordinary. The Vreth did not know what to make of this. I felt them probe harder. The warmth behind my sternum became a pressure. The pressure became what I can only describe as a very precise and thorough discomfort, the kind that is calibrated, not random pain, but targeted, methodical, incremental, as if someone were testing a load-bearing wall by adding weight 1 kilogram at a time and waiting to see when it failed. They increased the signal. I breathed through it. They increased it again. My hands were shaking on my knees and I kept them flat, and I breathed. The lights outside the port glass changed color. I don't know what that meant in their language, but it happened 4 times over the next 6 hours. I was tracking by my watch, and each time they changed, the quality of the attention on me shifted. The first change was what I would call confusion, if I am allowed to assign them that. The second was recalibration. The third, something that felt almost like a pause, the whole ship going very still, the diffuse signatures pulling back slightly, A moment of what I can only describe as the confluence thinking. The fourth change I felt in my molars, a vibration at the edge of hearing, and then the pressure stopped. Not withdrawn. Stopped, as if they had concluded something. I was aware that I was the only one awake. I was aware that the others were breathing, all of them. I checked each one, walking the Harrow's cramped main bay with my legs barely cooperating, checking pulse points the way the medic had taught me on my first deployment. Alive. All of them alive and asleep and filed away in whatever catalog the Confluence maintained. I sat back down. 3 hours later, I was fighting to stay conscious by then, talking to myself in a low murmur, just keeping words moving through my head. The rescue frigate UES Candant picked up the beacon and burned hard for our position. I heard its drive signature before the Harrow's damaged sensors registered it. The moment I heard it, the warmth in my chest faded entirely. The diffuse signatures on the internal sensors dropped to 0 across 6 seconds. The Vreth Confluence left the way it had come, through every seam at once, back into the methane dark. The Candant's boarding party found me sitting on the deck with my back against the nav console and 11 sleeping crew around me. It took the medics 40 minutes to wake the others. They were unharmed. Every one of them. No injuries, no memory of the contact at all. Just the sense of having had a very deep, dreamless sleep. Vasara asked me what had happened while he was out. I told him most of it. He sat with it for a while and then he said, "They let us go." I told him I didn't think that was the right framing either. They hadn't let us go. They had finished. We had been assessed and filed, all 12 of us, and the Vreth had moved on, the way any cataloger moves on when the data collection is complete. The difference was that my entry in their catalog had taken them 6 hours and 4 revisions, and the conclusion they arrived at was not, apparently, the one they had expected. We found the transmission 14 months later, embedded in a passive relay buoy the Confluence had seeded in the outer system, a filing index, the xenolinguists eventually decoded, meant for other branches of the distributed intelligence. A record of what had been encountered, and how it had been rated. 11 entries, quick and clean. Species, Homo sapiens. Subclassification, low-order biological. Threat rating, negligible. Catalog status, complete. And then a 12th entry, filed separately. My biometrics. I recognized the parameters they had measured. The entry was longer than the others. The rating field, where the others read low-order biological, had been left blank and then overwritten 3 times, with designations I didn't have the vocabulary to fully translate. The xenolinguists spent a year on it. The best approximation they came to, the phrase they finally settled on, was assessment ongoing. Category requires revision. 11 of us had been catalogued, rated, and filed in the first hour. I had broken their taxonomy. I don't take pride in that. Not the way people expect me to, when they eventually drag the story out. I take no pride in it because the Vreth Confluence revised its category and moved on, and now it knows what it encountered, and that knowledge is filed in a distributed intelligence that spans 11 star systems, and the next ship that goes to the Zenith Reach will meet something that has already done its homework on us. I only tell people this once. We did not win anything on that shelf. We were counted, and the count came out different than expected, and now the counter knows. That is the sum of it. Whatever calculation the Vreth are running with that data, whatever conclusion their revised category leads them to, is a calculation I am not able to audit. What I know is that gunnery sergeants are trained to endure. That is the job. That is the whole job. I did not know, until the Harrow, that it would be enough to make an alien intelligence rewrite its rules. I still do not know if that was a good thing,